Hello, thank you for coming out here. For those who do not know me, hold on a moment. Let me take a moment to see if I can improve my tech here. There we go, rotation locked. Okay. For those who do not know me, I am Tom Swiss. I blog on the Patheos Pagan channel as the Zen Pagan. I am the author of the book Why Buddha Touched the Earth, which you can find at the Ace Tent, and you can help me get gas money to get home and pay for the speeding ticket I got on the way here. And if I count on my fingers right, this is my 20th Starwood, and I've been a presenter at most of those. Among my interests are satire and parody religions. I'm just talking about the Discordians. I've paid to join the Church of the Subgenius, and I try to come out and catch the end of X Day when I can. I'm a Discordian Pope, but so is every man, woman, and child on Earth, so that's not really a big deal. I was in early on Pastafarianism. And so I've been very interested in the satirical winter holiday Festivus that goes back to an episode of Seinfeld from the late 90s. In this episode, George Costanza, Jerry Seinfeld's friend, his family has a holiday celebration that's sort of a protest against consumerism, but also just part of the usual awkward weirdness that was the whole point of Seinfeld. As it turned out, I learned there was actually some serious scholarship about magic behind the creation of Festivus. One of the writers of that episode was a guy named Dan O'Keefe, and Festivus it grew out of, it was not a winter holiday celebration, but they had this family holiday Festivus that his father, Daniel Lawrence O'Keefe, had first done to celebrate his first date with his wife. And professionally, the elder O'Keefe, as far as he's remembered today, he was an editor at Reader's Digest, which was a few notches more highbrow back in the 60s and 70s than it is today. He worked with Ray Bradbury, Ishmael Reed, Cecil Malash, some writers who were, some pretty intellectual guys. But he also had a PhD in sociology, and he had a fascination with magical practices in different societies throughout history. And he wrote a book, Stolen Lightning, The Social Theory of Magic, which got mentioned in an article about Festivus. Would never have heard of this book or found it in any way, shape, or form if it was not for Festivus. So make of that a little bit what you will. So the origins of Festivus go back to the 1960s, and while the aluminum pole wasn't part of the celebration, the famous aluminum pole that everyone puts up now, there was actually an airing of grievances in that family holiday. And O'Keefe has been recognized as the creator of Festivus. You may see him occasionally referenced on the internet about that. And that family holiday took place while he was doing research for this book. So I thought, well, it'd be worthwhile to go ahead and check this out. It is a dense academic text full of references to sociologists and anthropologists I'm not all that familiar with myself. And written in the 70s and 80s. There are some expressions and ideas in there. He talks a lot about Freudian psychoanalysis, and there's a whole bunch of talk about, primitive man that ring a little odd to our ears today. But his goal is to develop a theory of magic as a social phenomenon, and it's structured around 13 postulates about magic. I thought, there'd be some interesting things we could talk about. Magic is a form of social action. Magical social action consists of symbolic performances, and linguistic symbolism is central to magic. Magical symbolic action is rigidly scripted. Magical scripts achieve their social effects largely by pre-existing or prefigured argument. Magic borrows symbolism from religion and uses it to argue with religion in a dialectic that renews religion. I told you this is an academic take. Magic is a byproduct of the projection of society in religion. Religion is the institution that creates or models magic for society. Now, these are the ones that really get interesting, I think, here. Magic tries to protect the self. Magic helped develop the institution of the individual. Magic, especially black magic, is an index of social pressure on selves and individuals. Magic persists as an expression of certain aspects of civilization, and magical symbolism travels easily and accumulates history. Now, Did I bring a water bottle? I thought I brought my water bottle. Yeah. Well, my voice will be going away halfway through this probably. Um, Now there's 9th, 10th, and 11th postulates that magic tries to protect the self. Magic helped develop the institution of the individual, and black magic is an index of social pressure. These are interesting for the times in which we find ourselves, I think, here. As we look at the situation we have with the refugee crisis and the climate crisis, on one side we have reactionary or head in the sand approaches to those. On the other side, the nominal left is fragmented. We have a lot of performative social media wokeness, and even violent vigilantism, and ineffective centrism, and apologetics for past democratic sins. And we have magic having a pop culture moment. And it seems like those three postulates might have something to say about that. Why we're seeing rituals, as we had last night, the candle ritual for the folks in the refugee detention centers. You have people trying to put curses on Trump. People were trying to curse his Independence Day, what was it, celebration of America, whatever it was that he called his little ego fest there. But it's not just a question of the Trump era. We started to get into trouble way back before Trump, before Obama, before either Bush, back in the 19th century. Or even we can go back before that to the end of the Middle Ages, when the process of land enclosure began in England. And this is the period where we as a species started transitioning from being agriculturalists, mostly in small villages with occasional cities as trading posts and government centers, to most of us living in industrial cities. And it's just within about the past decade, I think it was 2007 or 2008. It was while I was writing Why Buddha Touched the Earth that I saw this article that demographers believe that we had passed the point where more than half of the human race now lives in industrialized cities. So we're going through a huge transition, as huge as the transition from Paleolithic gatherer-hunters to Neolithic agriculturalists. We are in the middle of this thing. So I always want to take a broad view of the history, and brief commercial plug, I take that view in Why Buddha Touched the Earth, which you can purchase at the Ace Tent. As I already mentioned, I'll mention it again. So we have perhaps a bit more need of magic than we had a couple of years ago, but it's not like we didn't need magic a couple of years ago, which is why we have the entire neo-pagan revival, in my opinion. Because we have now the technological capacity for repression and homicide and ecocide on an industrial scale, but we also have, if we become wise, the capacity for healing and housing and feeding every human being on the planet in a sustainable culture and green production systems. We've probably heard the cliche about the Chinese word for crisis being made of danger and opportunity. Well, it's not true, but the cliche persists because that is a truth about crisis. It is danger plus opportunity. And if we're going to get through this crisis, we're going to have to bring forth a lot of change. And Aleister Crowley tells us that magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. And we're also going to have to push those changes against the social structure that has a great deal of energy invested in resisting foundational change. Change at the root, which is what the word radical means. The square root sign, it's called the radical sign. It's the root sign. So radical doesn't mean let's go burn everything down, but it means we got to get to the root of the situation here and make change there. You got to attack the roots, not the branches, not the leaves. So yeah, right now in our society, we've got a system of unsustainable industrialization and an economic system that makes billionaires, a healthcare system whose whole job is to take your money and not give you care, and that's the status quo power structure. If we're going to fix this stuff, we're going to have to be rebels. And so I thought to best address those three postulates, it would be best to put them in the framework of the others, but it's also my intention to kind of take those as jumping off points, and we'll have a little discussion about all this stuff. So I'm just going to ramble on for a while and talk about these points, and then we'll throw it open to some open discussion here. Okay, so first postulate he has is magic is a form of social action. You know, we could give a dozen definitions of magic. We could spend a whole hour talking about different definitions, and these definitions would contradict each other in some ways and agree to some degree, and they'd be appropriate to some contexts and not others. O'Keefe was not a practitioner of magic, and in his book, he kind of tries to remain agnostic about whether there are actually paranormal, supernatural, whatever you want to call it, effects going on. But he's taking it as a sociological phenomenon. And he begins with a question rooted in the sociological literature. He says, this study began with a problem in sociological theory, especially with Durkheim. I'm going to hideously mispronounce people's names because I'm an autodidact and I didn't hear these things in classes. I read them, so sorry. If you know these, what's wrong with you? I'm sorry. Anyway, a problem in sociological theory, especially with Durkheim and Weber. These are two of the founders of sociology as a discipline. Why did Max Weber use the word magic on almost every page and never define it? What is magic? I got my first lead from two short sections in Durkheim's impressive study of religion as the worship of society. In 13 short pages, it stated that magic is something anti-religious that develops out of religion. Why? In certain writers in the Freudian tradition, I saw a hint of the answer. Magic is symbolism expropriated to protect the self against the social. My deduction, magic defends the self against society. If religion is the projection of the overwhelming power of the group, our little splinter religions may not be that, but we can certainly see in society in general religion doing that. And if magic derives from religion but sets itself up on a somewhat independent basis to help individuals, and is at the same time frequently reported to be hostile to religion, then is not the answer apparent. Magic is the expropriation of religious collective representations for individual or subgroup purposes to enable the individual ego to resist psychic extinction or the subgroup to resist cognitive collapse. Magic is real action. Something really happens. Often something violent, usually something of consequence. People are shaken, infused, healed, destroyed, transformed. The social situation is altered. Magic is not mere illusion just because its efficacy depends on beliefs in illusory entities, if you want to argue whether they're illusory or not. Even if you take them as illusory. Shit happens when magic happens. And magic actions are rituals that make or change something. They operate mysteriously, and what they create is mostly mystical, but these mysterious actions have social effects. Magic is often performed on objects, with the action really oriented to the behavior of others. The objects have social meaning, the rites and representations are traditional, and other people are involved, at least implicitly. In fact, magic is more often than not collective social action. Solitary seeming magic, such as yoga and mysticism and the study of occult arts, also have social objectives. In practice, they translate into withdrawal and return. It's a phrase from Toynbee. The pursuit of power, prestige, and authority over others. This idea of withdrawal and return is modeled very well by the Buddha. He went away from society, and he came back. And then each year he would go off on retreat, just with his monks, and come back. We withdraw from society, we return. We withdraw to Starwood, and then we return to that crazy world out there. Now, this idea that the pursuit of power and authority, we might push back against that a little bit. If you've read Ronald Hutton, his book, Triumph of the Moon, fantastic history of Wicca and the occult revival of the 19th century, early 20th century, that is really the roots of all this stuff that we're doing here. And he talks about how the 19th century occult movements took magic from medieval practice and started using it as a path for spiritual development. That medieval magic was all about, it was directed to practical ends, mostly. Again, the texts try and talk about religious stuff, but how it actually got used was very much, to bring gold to yourself, to bring yourself power, to bring yourself a lover, this is what you do. So I think that holds as a general statement over all of human history, even if we do see in the past 200 years or so a direction of magic more towards spiritual growth, at least in theory. And it also reminds me, the idea of magic as a social phenomenon reminds me of an idea from Robert Anton Wilson, one of our Starwood elders. In the Illuminatus trilogy, and if you're the sort of person who comes to Starwood, and if you read books, if you come to Starwood, you probably read books. And if you read science fiction in particular, and if you come to Starwood, that probably applies. You should definitely read the Illuminatus trilogy. It is a psychedelic science fiction classic. You really need to read it. And there's a passage in there where Wilson and his co-author, Robert Shea, explain how magic creates reality in a political sense. This is a discussion between characters Hagbard Celine and Simon Moon as they're waiting for the cops and the tear gas in Chicago in 1968. Chairman Mao didn't say half of it, Hagbard replied, holding a handkerchief to his own face. His words came through muffled. It isn't only political power that grows out of the barrel of a gun. So does a whole definition of reality, a set, and the action that has to happen on that particular set and on none other. Oh, don't be so bloody patronizing, I objected, looking around a corner in time and realizing this is the night I would be maced. That's just Marx. The ideology of the ruling class becomes the ideology of the whole society. Not the ideology, the reality. He lowered his handkerchief. This was a public park until they changed the definition. Now the guns have changed the reality. It isn't a public park. There's more than one kind of magic. Just like the Enclosure Acts, I said hollowly. One day the land belonged to the people. The next day it belonged to the landlords. And like the Narcotics Acts, he added, 100,000 harmless junkies became criminals overnight by act of Congress in 1927. 10 years later, in 1937, all the potheads in the country became criminals overnight by act of Congress. And they really were criminals when the papers were signed. The guns prove it. Walk away from those guns, waving a joint, and refuse to halt when they tell you. Their imagination will become your reality in a second. So there's some interesting mixes here of magic, psychology, sociology, and politics. His next postulate, magical social action consists of symbolic performances, and linguistic symbolism is central to magic. I think most of us understand that. We're manipulating symbols when we do magic. If you don't think that words have magic power, walk up to somebody and say, fuck you, or make America great again, or use the N word, or the C word, or the K word, or any of those other words I won't even say because they're that powerful. It's primitive magic, but it's real powerful. I think it's useful to call out a point here that everything that uses language, it's popular to talk about, well, so-and-so is just a social construct, Gender is just a social construct. Property is a social construct. Blah, blah, blah is a social construct. Everything is a social construct if we're using language to talk about it, because language is a social construct, If you have a baby on a desert island with a machine that feeds it and sees to its needs but never speaks, you have no language. So it takes society to create language. Anyway, O'Keefe says, talking about symbolism, and he's using this word primitive, and I'm just repeating what he says, even though primitive rings a little odd to our ears today. Something seems to steal a primitive man's attention as if by magic. He is caught and held by the image. When the ego, as a category of the human spirit, was not much developed, intentionality, a hugely important magical concept, intentionality was not sufficiently organized to control attentionality, and men were singularly vulnerable to fascinations. One of the functions of the shaman was to defend smaller, vulnerable societies from deadly chain reactions caused by such fascinations. Man's attentionality is especially vulnerable to words, since they constitute his species-specific environment. The magic of words is of the same stuff as the world that made us. This reminds me of Campbell's idea that myth is that womb that in which we are born as persons, we are born socially, not just biologically. The magic of words is of the same stuff as the world that made us, and so it can go straight into us. But magic is not so much these vulnerabilities and effects as it is the use to which they are put. In magic, man concentrates his efforts, gets some control over these phenomena, and ultimately over his own intentionality. He's quoting Ernst Cassier's an essay on man here. Faith in magic is one of the earliest and most striking expressions of man's awakening self-confidence. Here he no longer feels himself at the mercy of natural or supernatural forces. He begins to play his own part. And now O'Keefe says, magical action is rigidly scripted. And as someone who likes a lot of improv in their rituals, make it up as you go along, I was like, I don't know about that. I want to push back against that. But it is true that these improv rituals are largely a matter of selecting pre-made bits and kind of gluing them together with whatever's available in the moment. And also, again, O'Keefe is trying to look at all of human experience, not us modern, eclectic people drawing from thousands of years of tradition as we have today. And in most history, and certainly prehistory, these things tend to be rigidly scripted. And in his view, magic takes these scripts out of religion. It takes chance, incantations, whole frameworks of operation are yanked out and repurposed. By religion, he means the traditional symbolic projection of the community. So religion is something that the whole community does. And if you happen to be on the outs with the community because you're doing some kind of rebellious or whatever, you're going to take what the community has and turn it against them. And when you have something that your community agrees is powerful, you're going to be careful about changing it. You know, this thing is slapped with warning labels and, no user serviceable parts inside. You're going to be careful about that, because if you fuck with it, you're either going to make it powerless, you're going to blow something that's not going to be useful anymore, or it's going to misfire and you're going to hurt yourself. So you're going to be careful about changing things. Sacred dramas are scripted in a literal sense. The words used in magic and religion are memorized and must be said just right. Sometimes they can kill you if they are said wrong, he points out. Now we have an interesting time here in the Neo-Pagan revival because some of these scripts are just being written. Had a really interesting moment Wednesday we tried to do a little intentional fire, just a little model of the fire circle. We talked about how it works as a magical operation. And somebody started a chant. Probably heard this chant around the fire before. Hoof and horn, all that dies shall be reborn. Corn and grain, all that falls shall rise again. Now the fellow who wrote that chant is right here. It's Ian Corrigan, one of the organizers of Starwood. And the woman who started that chant said, hey, what? I had no idea. I learned that chant long before I knew it. And she learned it at a rainbow gathering, not even at an explicitly pagan event. So new scripts can be written. Obviously, if no new scripts ever got written, there wouldn't be any scripts to stay the same. But once they succeed, if they become important enough to become part of religious practice, then they kind of get fixed because everybody's like, well, we know that works. Don't mess with it. Magical scripts achieve their social effects largely by pre-existing or prefigured agreements. Speaking of Ian, I love watching Ian and Sue do the opening and closing, or any ritual, opening and closing rituals here, or I got to go to the Stone Creek ADF, their fall equinox festival. They were up at Tradara. They had dug a new sacred well. They were doing a whole thing there, and I got to hang out for that. And it was cool. It was really cool. I'm not an ADF guy, but they let me play with them. Yay! And what does Ian always ask? Is it your will that this working take place? And I've stolen from him the idea of always asking that question 3 times when I do ritual, because I believe that which you tell me 3 times is true. So I also connect a little Lewis Carroll in there. Setting intent is the first step in any magical working. As old crazy Uncle Alistair said, every intentional act is a magical act. And if we're doing any magic that involves more than one person, we have to agree on intent. Otherwise, we're not going to get very far. It's sort of like the practice in improv comedy. Have you ever taken like an improv comedy class? Yeah, the famous rule of improv is yes and. For example, I'm on stage with somebody and they say, hey, let's go to the circus. If I go, nah, we have not gone anywhere, okay? The whole thing is going to fall in fit. But if I say, yes, and we should take some peanuts for the elephants. And he goes, yes, and, oh, what kind of peanuts should we take for circus elephants? We should take circus peanuts. And then we're on our way to a sketch about giving sugar to circus animals and a stampede happening or something like that. It might not be a good sketch, but we can go somewhere with it, right? We have to yes and build and build and build. A lot of times the intent in a magical ritual is pre-existing because we already have agreement about the nature and intent of the ritual. If you come to me for healing work, we already have an agreement on generally what's supposed to happen in that moment. An initiation ceremony, a marriage, a hand fasting, a funeral, or wake. We've seen these before. We know what's going to happen. We have a set of expectations about how this is going to go. But also, a successful magician persuades us into agreement by playing on our ideas of identity. Really nice passage O'Keefe has here. The rhetor states a premise in a persuasive manner so as to get the people to identify their own inarticulated consensus with his intention. We all agree, the speaker says, and then gives his own definition of some principle that sounds close enough to the general will so that the crowd will go along with him. Once agreement on the major premise is secured, the conclusion is cinched. I would like to characterize this operation as a first-person singular speaking in the first-person plural and getting away with it. I think this operation is significant for magic. Even in real institutional magic, there is often an underlying reasoning in which the major premise is from the religious consensus universe of discourse and slanted. This makes possible a deduction of magical effect. In magic in the weak sense, persuasion often takes the form of speaking in the management voice before you belong to the management. That's kind of the key to my success, such as it has been over the years, speaking in the management voice before you belong to the management. And he suggests that magic works through a process of deviation via a temporary relaxation of the normal social frame of orientation. We call it raising magical energy. And by overvaluation and patterning of the resulting experiences by social agreement, which we call setting intention. So we relax the normal frame, we set intention, we melt the mind, and then we pour it into a new mold. And that's why we come to temporary autonomous zones like Starwood, where the usual social frame is relaxed, to say the least, and we have an agreement that this is a magical space. Just in case anyone here is new, let me speak in the management voice for a moment and assure you that this is magic. And if you are here, you are a magician, and that's what you're doing. So yes, if anyone needed that confirmation by the power of being on the speaker's roster and wearing a purple top hat, I proclaim it so. And O'Keefe points out that the normal frame is actually pretty fragile. We have to continually put attention on that normal frame of society in order to maintain it. It's really easy to distract people from it. So there are inevitable lapses from it, right? We have weird stuff happens. And the frame, these eruptions of unusual material are not only rationalized by the frame, they have to be taken over and patterned for the protection of the paramount reality. Religion has always done this. As the social frame, as our social frame, becomes increasingly scientific and the religious frame seems increasingly to detach itself from it and become marginal, the religious frame seems by comparison in our secular age to be relatively more preoccupied with these phenomena. But this is in part because religion, as the original frame of overarching reality, had to protect itself against this chaos by inventing patterns to contain it. Part of the tension between magic and religion is due to the comparatively greater use that magic deliberately makes of frame-relaxing phenomenon, which religion attempts to control. Churches try to monopolize magic, in part because they are always suspicious of these phenomena, even of mysticism. The framework of orientation of the religious worldview always remains closer to the frame of paramount reality, which used to nest within it, whereas magic purposely cultivates paranormal phenomena in, I love this phrase, in experimental act-as-if groups as draft legislation for the creation of frame alterations. In other words, us magicians are out here running experiments about altering the whole social frame. And, my friends, that is something we desperately, desperately, desperately need to do these days. Magic borrows from religion and uses it to argue with religion in a dialectic that renews religion. The relationship between magic and religion is one of those foundational definitional arguments, and different schools of sociology and anthropology have different opinions about them. This is his take. Okay. Did religion develop out of magic, or did magic develop from religion? To some degree, it's even a question of how you define these terms, right? O'Keefe holds that magic derives from religion rather than vice versa. Magic is a byproduct of the projection of society in religion, and magic is the institution that creates or models magic for society. As one point that was especially relevant to us here in the neo-pagan revival, as we seek to revive or borrow from the old ways, we have plenty of evidence of magic being borrowed from older, bypassed, wounded, or more primitive religions. In the ancient world, for example, the magical rites of the mystery cults were in many cases borrowed from primitive rural religions. Magic, in fact, is quite industriously antiquarian, because magic travels easily, accumulates in cosmopolitan civilizations once committed to writing, is preserved and easily revived in occult revivals. Remnants of quite remote religions can persist within magical amalgams. Religious ideas from other societies often first penetrate a culture as magic, just as the stranger's religion is always seen as magical. And they persist in a magical afterglow when they are vanquished, thus, just as outlawed religions are condemned as magical. Dead or dying religions are a major source of magic, especially when the stricken cults are denigrated as magical by their successor, the way Christianity declared the gods of Rome to be demons. Does any of this sound familiar to our interest here as neo-pagans? The idea that the stranger's religion is always seen as magical, I think, is interesting if you watch anime at all. The way that Christianity is sometimes portrayed in Japanese culture. Just as we have the mysterious East, in various works, the monk, the Buddhist monk, the Taoist from the mysterious East with mysterious powers. Sometimes you see the Westerner with mysterious powers, the Trigun, the anime. There's one character, Nicholas Wolfwood, the priest. He's this man of mystery. He's got his little portable confessional that he puts on people's heads. 'Cause it's a weird thing. Alchemy. Full Metal Alchemist, Western tradition of alchemy, taken as even more weird than it is to us, because the stranger's religion is always extra magic. And this also dovetails nicely with an idea that has kind of been foundational to my work over the past decade. This is an idea from Joseph Campbell in an essay called "The Symbol Without Meaning." He talks about the difference between shamanistic and priestly religions. In gatherer-hunter societies, there's very little specialization. Everybody does everything. You grab a 15-year-old boy out of one of these cultures, and he knows all of the culture and technology. He might not be the best at making an arrowhead, but he can chip an arrowhead. He might not be the best at finding medicinal plants, but he knows, if I got the runs, this is the root I got to chew, right? And that includes religion. The mystical experience is available to everybody. The tribal shaman is the best at going into that visionary mystical state and talking to the spirits, but it can happen to anybody. In fact, quite likely part of your initiation into adulthood, you had to have that experience. But then we get civilized, we become farmers, and everybody becomes a specialist, including religion. Organized priestly religion, as Campbell points out, became a way to resolve humans to their limited roles. We started to become cogs in the machines before there were even machines, when we became agrarians. Access to mystical states of consciousness was restricted to those specialized devotees authorized by the power structure, the priest. And the distinguishing characteristic of the shaman is their own direct relationship to the spirit world. The distinguishing characteristic of the priest is ritual investiture. You can't become a priest unless another priest, the bishop, whoever has the thing, does the investiture on you. You take the Catholic Church as a prime example here, right? The bishop has to do the juju over the guy to turn him into a priest. I can't just declare, yeah, I'm a Catholic priest. Now, as that started to break down, we get these Protestant sects and your storefront preachers and everything, almost a more shamanistic mode, where it's like, I'm filled with the Holy Spirit, and I'm going to start preaching. And that's really getting back more to that shamanistic mode, and it's also kind of what we do here. We're just working with a different, in a different direction, but we got that in common with the holy roller. So that's an interesting thing to think about. So this priestly religion, this is what O'Keefe is referring to as the projection of the overwhelming power of the group. And it seems to me this is where the neo-pagan revival comes in. It's an opportunity to build a new sort of religion, touching on that shamanistic direct experience, where priests are more first among equals, people who just are a little better at doing ritual, like Ian. He's just damn good at doing ritual, but it's not because anybody did the zot over him or he has better access to the spirit world than any of us do. Just as some of us are better musicians, he's a better ritualist. So magic is rebellion against that pressure. And when I was writing this, it popped into my head the last scene of the last Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi, where the First Order thinks it's stamped out the Jedi and the Resistance, and then you see that slave kid pick up the broom with the Force and start sweeping it away there. It's like you can't crush it, Can't crush magic. Magic tries to protect the self, and magic helped develop the institution of the individual. So a little bit of definition here. By the self, he's talking about the psychological self, the inner subjective experience that I am separate from the world around me. I have my own life, my own thing going on here. While the individual refers to an objective, political, legal, social institution, acknowledgement by the tribe, by the group. So obviously you can have a self in a society that does not recognize the individual. Or you could have a legal, social institution of the individual, but yet there are some people who never really come to have a fully formed self. Some people wandering around out there, personality disorders or whatever, they never really establish a healthy ego, individual ego there. So in O'Keefe's view, throughout human history, magic has served as a form of resistance to that conformity-inducing sort of religion and the pressure it puts on the self. And so it seems to me magic is also suited to a time when we need a political resistance. So O'Keefe goes back to Freudianism and psychoanalysis as he's talking about this, which usually sees magic as infantile, regressive, dysfunctional. Not always, but tends to take that. So some of the language here will reflect that. But he also finds that these ideas help demonstrate what it is that magic is defending against. One of the important ideas here is the idea of ego death, that helplessness is ego death, that whole concept of the self can collapse. And that can actually even lead to physical death, to what's sometimes called voodoo death, where the shock, the social shock, someone just stops living. The nervous system says, nope, I'm done. And magic, which psychoanalysts often see as neurosis, but magic offers us the opportunity to connect to the power of the gods. He quotes here Wilhelm Stockel. He's talking about this in a negative sense, but it's still, you may recognize a little bit. The life of the compulsive neurotic is but a series of oracles. A small change of posture or of an everyday routine may be good luck or bad luck. By adherence to superstition, man endows himself with mystical power. He steals the power of the deity. Now, he's phrasing this negatively, but it matches with some of what Aleister Crowley said about his communications from the secret chiefs If you're not familiar with this idea, this goes back to the Theosophical Society and Blavatsky, this whole idea that they were authorized by these secret chiefs who maybe they were ascendant mortals, maybe they were spiritual beings, but they were conveniently far off in Tibet, so nobody could actually find them and talk to them, but they would send their messages through mediumistic means to Blavatsky, and for a couple generations of occultists after that, there are a lot of references to the secret chiefs. And Crowley said, their powers move in dimensions of time and space quite other than those with which we are familiar. Their values are incomprehensible to us. To a secret chief wielding this weapon, the nice conduct of a clouded cane might be infinitely more important than a war, famine, and pestilence such as might exterminate a third part of the race, to promote whose welfare is the crux of his oath and the sole reason of his existence. They may send an ordinary living man, whether one of themselves or no, I cannot feel sure, to instruct me in some task, or to set me right when I have erred. Then there have been messages conveyed by natural objects, animate or inanimate. Needless to say, the outstanding example in my life is the whole plan of campaign concerning the Book of the Law. The Book of the Law is Crowley's big work, Fourth Dilemma, and he was convinced that he was chosen by the deities to do this because he happened to stumble across an old draft of it in his attic at one point, and he's just, oh, this is a sign from the deities. I found my old writings. This is the sign. And I'm also reminded here of the Discordian law of fives. Everything happens in fives, or multiples of five, or is in some way connected to the number five. And the harder you look, the more you will find this to be true. Let me repeat. The harder you look, the more evidence you will find for this proposition. Just so, if you decide that your life is magic, if you decide that you have been touched by the deities or the fae or the spirits of the ancestors or whoever, the harder you look, the more evidence you will find for this proposition. So magic gives us the power to believe that we individually are important, that we have a connection to however we choose to conceive and think about those higher powers. In that, something that occurred to me that might be relevant to the moment, in that, this sort of magic is anti-fascist. Because one of the key tenets of fascism is that you, individual, do not matter. We're going to bundle you all together into the only the great leader matters. All the rest of you, the only way you can have value is to kind of follow in his wake, follow in his like drafting behind him, like the big truck on the highway, right? Let his air currents carry you along. That's the actual symbol of the fasces, right? Is a bundle of thin sticks or reeds bound together. The individual one doesn't matter. You got to bundle a whole bunch of them together there. I'm also reminded of Hunter S. Thompson's observation that politics is the art of controlling your environment. I miss Thompson. Man, we need Hunter Thompson now. Words like empowerment and agency. Agency. That's a good one. We should use more in our everyday conversations. Seem really relevant to these points about magic. Magic lets us connect with that power that gives us empowerment and agency. He quotes an anthropologist and psychoanalyst. I'm going to, again, hideously mispronounce this guy's name. It's got accent marks all over it. Geza Roheim, a book called Magic and Schizophrenia, and I have definitely put that on my reading list. We grow up through magic and in magic. Our first response to the frustrations of reality is magic, and without this belief in ourselves, we cannot hold our own against the environment and against the superego. In magic, mankind is fighting for freedom. That sounds pretty good to me. Magic, especially black magic, is an index of social pressure on selves, the individual experience, and individuals, the institution in society. He says, black magic springs up when either the self or the individual is stressed, even in modern times. He starts out here with an interesting idea about how accusations of witchcraft might have originated in early societies. Now, witchcraft in this context, we're not talking about our Wiccan friends and the witchcraft revival and everything. We're talking about the idea of these monstrous beasts that transform and attack poor defenseless humans here, right? So in these early societies, rejection by the group can lead to death. You can die if the group cuts you off, either by psychosomatic illness, voodoo death, right? I am cut off from the collective like a Borg, and I wither and die, therefore. Or they just kill you. You're executed. You know, the tribe drives you out. They stab you, or they drive you out away from the fire, keep you away from the food, the hunting grounds, and you die. And in these societies, there isn't a lot of hierarchy. It's not necessarily like, okay, we have been to the tribal council and the chief. You know, there's maybe a head man, but there's not a lot of structure. There's not a court that you've been condemned by. So almost anyone can, under certain circumstances, speak with that management voice, to use the term we talked about before. And so that management voice can kill. And he says, what attacks the guilty person is the moral force of society. And this force is always personified in an individual who speaks on its behalf. Howard Becker calls such a person a moral entrepreneur. It's an interesting term, a moral entrepreneur. Malinowski showed how this moral initiative could force a Trobriander to kill himself. Among very primitive people, the moral entrepreneur's power will perhaps be conceptualized as a totem. It is an easy step from this to suppose that the guilty person may imagine that his critic has sent his totem animal to attack him. And this would explain why these kind of witch beliefs, again, not Wicca, but you know, these sort of witch beliefs all over the world, including the idea of the witch sending her familiar to attack her victim in the night. The man condemned to die by group morality may indeed, during the throes of that killer anxiety or disorganizing depression or whatever the precise process of voodoo death is, he may believe that he is being destroyed by a bat or a black cat or a werewolf or some other totem whose taboo he infringed, or the totem of the clan whom he offended, or the personal totem of the person who criticized him. And then accusing the accuser of witchcraft for these attacks becomes a means of defense. His idea is that the accusation of witchcraft becomes the magical act, perhaps the earliest, the most primitive magic, in which an individual escapes that voodoo death by turning the tables on the moral entrepreneur who is putting that superego pressure on him. Someone says, you are violating the group morality. This could kill you in a primitive society. But instead, you accuse him of being a witch, of being the very opposite of every value the group stands for. And this may save your life. Now, we tend to take the witch hunts of Europe and colonial America as our model, because that's our history, once we come down here, where the accused people were of low status. And O'Keefe mentions that if we go back to Tudor England, the poor were being accused of witchcraft just as land enclosure and capitalism were getting started. And these witch accusations helped force the end of the right of the commons and bring on the revolution of privatization and capitalism. Now, not all revolutions are good revolutions. It's worth pointing out there. But in some other societies, accusations of witchcraft are used to punch up, as the kids like to say, against the powerful. Especially in some African societies, you might accuse the chief or the headman of witchcraft as a way of making even the powerful obey the rules. So some interesting power strategies here, right? Imagine some religious right type attacking your rights, and you turn the tables and accuse them of witchcraft. You know, you're a witch. No, you're the witch. You know, yeah. So how does black magic then become an index of social pressure? I thought this was a very interesting passage. When the determined world suddenly reveals itself as not determined, this is Sartre wrote this, the recognition may be experienced as horror. Consider the horror many Democrats experienced when they learned that the determined world of politics in 2016 was not so determined after all. The effect of that horror may be regressive. Individuals may become suspicious, inclined to wonder, like primitive man, who is doing it rather than what is doing it. Conspiracy theories then abound. Does this sound familiar at all? From QAnon to Russiagate, and what Hofstadter calls the paranoid style may prevail in politics, as institutions are suspected of being less solid than they seem. Then each thing meets in mere repugnance, and homo homini lupus, or man is wolf to man, a little Latin there, man is wolf to man, implies that every man is also a sorcerer. Then desperate men try to regain their magical powers, first through status symbols, later through mystifications and deceit. But, and this is important as we magicians decide what kind of magic we want to work, these mystifications and deceit, such attempts are confessions of weakness and vulnerability, rather than of strength, and they aggravate social conflict. So in these times, as we are confronted with institutions that don't have the strength we thought they did, there's a tendency to paranoia all around us. You know, we want to regain our magical powers. Yes, absolutely. But we need to make sure that we're doing that in a healthy way. I really appreciated what Vermin Supreme had to say yesterday, in there in these very tense situations and trying to diffuse and getting each side to see the other side as human. Really wonderful. Yeah. We need a big element of the sacred clown in the magic that we're going to work if we're going to make this better, rather than just throw gasoline on the fire here. Magic persists as an expression of certain aspects of civilization. He says, magic may be the natural projection of advanced organic solidarity. So apparently there's this idea of societies being held together by division of labor, right? We divide the work up in our basic society here, and that binds us together. But today in post-industrial society, we have split the formal rationality of complex systems off from the substantive rationality of individuals. A little bit of jargon there. But the way that we've divided things up so that we're individualized atoms doing work that makes no sense makes the world seem uncanny to the self. And magical thinking is the only way of coping when the world becomes or seems demonic. Perhaps the occult is the natural expression of a society in which we live surrounded by machines, bureaucrats, technologies, and planning systems made by human rationality, but unfathomable to us personally. We have created this world in which it's very difficult to be a human being. That was maybe not the brightest thing for us to do, and we need to not do that. Magic symbolism travels easily and accumulates history. Love this. Last little quote here. Magic is a bookish business, and always has been since writing was invented. The grimoires of the Middle Ages, the luminous publications of the alchemists, the dream books of the ancient world pour forth like a torrent, and few titles are ever permanently lost. There are eras in which magic is quiescent, but the accumulated tradition is kept alive by antiquarian or eccentric interest, by underground cults, by the Vatican Library or the Warburg Institute in London, or the secret societies, or each era's equivalent of New York 6th Avenue in the 40s. Quotes here James Webb, not the guy who the telescope was named after, I presume. The occult is rejected knowledge. That is an underground whose basic unit is that of opposition to an establishment of the powers that are. And so again and again, magic belief is renewed when someone goes to the library and consults the tradition. So make sure to preserve those libraries, my friends. So I thought those were some very interesting postulates about magic, and I recommend, if you are the type of person who likes to read dense academic books about magic, you could take a look. Stolen Lightning, The Social Theory of Magic. So I'd like to throw, okay, perfect. I've been rambling on for about an hour, so we have about 15 minutes if people would like to throw open anything that struck for you that you would like to bring up for discussion.
First off, I think that this was really good, and what I would like is if I could have a copy of your presentation, then I would pay for it.
It'll be up on my blog. So you can this will turn into a series of blog posts, and it'll be up on The Zen Pagan. It'll be available for you for free. you can always send me money. There are links on the blog. You can buy my books at the Ace Tent. I think I said that before. I'll say it again. But yes, this will be up, and if this video comes out, it will be up on my YouTube channel. So yes, but thank you for talking about that.
So I've got some questions, and how this is relating to the time, the contemporary moment, and about the doing magic well. So I read John Michael Greer's blog, and he's
Okay.
gotten really into, well, he's ripped into like Michael Hughes' workings, because Michael Hughes has been hexing Trump and
Okay.
his administration
Okay.
in a very, according to John Michael Greer, in a very terrible, like not well crafted
Okay.
way, in a way that's really easy to actually reverse and harm the people that Hughes is trying
Right,
to help
right.
and actually help Trump. And,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
And I mean, he's like broadcasting, exactly the time to do it, every step of the working. He's confusing different items in the working that have historical, uses as a curse object or as a blessing object,
Okay.
and like changing them. So that is something. It seems as though, and then also taking that to, now we're in this moment where there is this contemporary pop, that magic has this pop culture moment, and people kind of it's obvious, it's out there, and people are starting to believe it more, and part of the way that like witches and pagans have been able to be out is because the dominant culture doesn't believe it. So what do you think about that? Like saying to the Baptist, you're a witch, after them calling you a witch, but you're already out as a witch.
So yeah, we would saying you're a witch would probably not be the most effective way to, but turning the tables and saying your values are. I think O'Keefe had the phrase in there that it's your values that are not the values of society, because that moral entrepreneur is saying you have sinned, you have gone against the values of our society,
Right.
and with the witchcraft accusation, you're turning the tables on them and saying no. You are the one whose values are against our society. I think there is some of that in our political process.
Yeah.
We do try to turn the tables on them. If we maybe conceive of that as a magical practice as well as a political one, it could be useful. The far right, the religious right, go around and tell us, we are a Christian nation, and you are violating the tenets of our society, and we say, no, we are a pluralistic nation. We are a nation of freedom and exploration, where freedom of conscience to choose your religious path or make your own religious path or be completely secular. That's right there in Amendment 1. It is your values that are not in line with society, my friends. So that would be, we wouldn't necessarily say you're a witch. I was interested. I have a great deal of respect for Greer. I'm not familiar with the other guy, the guy who's doing the
Michael Hughes.
Hughes. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with his work,
he
so I
blogged,
can't
I think, on
directly
Medium.
address that. But certainly, doing the work skillfully is highly important. I'm reminded of, during the campaign in 2016, people went and shut down Trump rallies, right? They would had this idea of, we will shut down Trump and this will stop Trump, and it actually made people more supportive of Trump.
Right.
This, you're not helping, So having intention is the first step, but having intention is not the only step. You have to have some skill here, and you have to have understanding of the energies with which you are working. Understanding of the energies with which you are working. Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it. I like that. I'm going to file that away there. So yes, when you're doing it politically, you had better understand, that if you are going to do something that seems like a threat to law and order, suddenly you are feeding the whole law and order wing of the Republican Party, and they're going to snap back and crack down, and people are going to, oh my God, well, we have to support our local police and everything. But instead, we want to point out when the police are breaking the law, that they're not being law and order when they kill a black kid in Baltimore for no good reason. That is, hey, that was actually a criminal act. What you're doing is not law and order. We are representing law and order. We are here, the people, to demand law and order, that our police obey the law and behave in an orderly fashion. So turning those tables is a good one there. So we got to understand the nature of which we're working. And yeah, so a little history is vital there. Again, what Vermin Supreme was talking about yesterday, and looking at the yippies and the sacred clowns throughout history, and how that has been so important. I often think of the story of Emperor Norton, beloved of Discordians. Emperor Norton was a real historical figure. He lived in the 19th century in San Francisco. He was contemporary with Mark Twain and Abraham Lincoln. And he one day up and declared himself Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico. And he kind of got people to go along with it. He demanded modest local taxes from people, which they paid. He issued his own currency. Long before Bitcoin, he was doing his own privately issued currency there. His declarations were printed for free in the newspapers. And there's a story that one night there was a gang of racists, white supremacists, we'd call them these days, headed to Chinatown to burn it down. And all that stood in their way was a solitary figure of Joshua Norton. And a rational man might have tried to argue with them out of this. A moralist would have scolded them for violating the tribal morality and using violence. A man as daft as Norton usually seemed might have commanded them to halt in the name of His Royal Imperial Majesty. But none of these tacts would have been effective, and Norton turned to none of them. Instead, he simply stood in the middle of the street and bowed his head in silent prayer, and the vigilantes dispersed. Discordians believe that every human being should live like Norton, just like that. I think Vermin Supreme is doing a real good job of that. We need these subtle energies. We need energies of love, even against the people who are our enemies. Jesus got that much right. Not necessarily because it's God says so, because it's the only way that you make this shit work. The only way you can turn that enemy into an ally is through love. People who get Ku Klux Klan members to hang up their hoods. People who go into the Westboro Baptist Church and get one of those family members to leave and come out and speak, to the world against why that was wrong and become an ambassador to peace. These things do happen. And that only happens when we stand before our enemy with love for the people behind us who are protecting, but also love for the enemy. And that's complicated, and it's hard, and it's subtle, and you got to know the energies with which you're working if you're going to do it. But it works a lot better than primitive zodding, which is going to backfire one way or another. So, does that answer that at all? I hope.
One of your things made me realize that the sense of hopelessness when the person loses their magic, that could be an explanation for a number of suicides and deaths of despair we're having in the United States.
Yes, we're having a tremendous epidemic of deaths of despair in this country. Suicides and deaths that are directly related to drug and overdose, drug and alcohol. People talk about the opioid crisis as if it's being caused by these chemicals. It's not a question of these chemicals out there. It's a question of our broken society and hopelessness that's out there. And people losing the magic. There's a phenomenon in psychology. They call it learned helplessness. They did some really nasty experiments back in the day. They took, I think it was dogs, just makes me really angry, you know. And I against animal experimentation in general, but I'm a dog person, man. This really, and they put them in a room that had like a low wall and 2 pieces of floor, and they would electrify the floor, and they'll go yipe, yipe, and would jump over the little piece of wall to the other part of the floor. Well, then they start electrifying that part of the floor as well, and once both of those parts of the floor were electrified, the dog just stopped jumping, stopped trying to get away from it after a couple of trials. So even if you then turn the electricity on that second half off, the dog had learned helplessness. It had learned that, well, it's no good. I could very easily just walk off of this onto the other half of the floor, but I've learned that doesn't help. And so stops trying. And that looks so much like a lot of what's going on in our culture. And yeah, people, they give up. They feel like they've lost. I lost my mojo, you know, to put it, you know, a little bit humorously. And so how do we get our mojo back? You got to go back to the source of magic and connect to that in yourself. And yeah, if you don't, you die. It's the death of the ego. It's voodoo death. It's death through drugs and alcohol. It's death directly through putting a gun in your mouth. And so we have a role as magical people in, I mean, to put it directly, saving lives. When we go out and help people find their magic, we can be saving people's lives, by golly. Wow. Wow, how about that? How about that? We take some of this Starwood out into the world with us. We might just save some lives.
There was something you had mentioned early on when you were enumerating some of his principles or whatever. The as if, I don't
As
know.
if groups, yes. So this is social agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one of his points is that the effects when a magical working happens are really subtle. And to a neutral outlooker, you know, so if I put on my skeptic hat, this is not the skeptic hat, you know, but if I were to put on my skeptic hat for a moment, and you know, when I put the skeptic hat on, I am a rational materialist, and I'm going to work from the hypothesis that all observable phenomenon have a material explanation in them, and so you know you go and you film this magical working from a couple different vantage points and everything, and I can say, oh yeah, so I see that this very small thing happened, but what happened was this group of people, they all agreed that it had significance, you know, so we are going to agree to act as if whatever tarot card randomly happens to come up is our message from the deities, message from the spirits, is our meditation for the day. Yes, and, as we said before. So, yeah, act as if groups.
Because I've been feeling like that is something that we could be doing in the larger world. And it would be sort of an act of radical magic to begin living our lives as if
Yes.
it was the world we wanted and not the bullshit world
Yeah.
that we're
Yeah.
dealing with.
I couldn't track it down through Google, and so I'm not 100% sure that I have the right story. But I think I remember Crowley saying something about that the magician should treat everything that happens to him as a message from the spirits, from the secret chiefs, from the divine. Everything that happens to you. Again, that what we might look at from the psychoanalytic perspective as neurosis is also magical practice, you know, because you're choosing to act as if this is a message from the gods. And when you do that, I think it was last year I had a whole conversation about pagan atheism and what does it mean for the gods to exist, and you know, we get into a whole questions of reality. What is a god? You know, do we make the gods through? When we make that decision, are we creating a god psychologically? You know, there are many possibilities there, and you want to choose the ontology that makes you happy. And I think we've got another thing coming into the space here. It looks like, and
You probably got I don't know, 10
Yeah,
minutes?
yeah, a couple minutes here. And also, Ivan Stang's going to be talking, so we'll get up that. But yes, time for a few more questions. If you find me around and want to talk to me later, always happy to ramble about this.
I've just got a theory question that's been tickling my brain. You briefly invoked the idea of like Starwood as a temporary autonomous zone.
Yeah.
And it's been a little
Using the
while.
word loosely, I mean, I know there are very specific definitions
Yeah.
of that.
So like at some point, I guess years ago, like I read the essay "Temporary Autonomous Zones" by like Hakim Bey or whatever,
Yeah,
who's like
yeah.
big classical anarchist political theorist. And so I'm trying to draw links in my mind of like, well, what would it look like if magic and anarchy are correlated in that way, like political.
Oh,
anarchy
yeah, a
in
lot
that
like
way.
chaos magic. Yeah, you'll find a lot of that connection, I think.
But people often levy at anarchists like, what would that even look like? Like, what if you succeeded? And as a way of saying, this is why it's ridiculous, because it's so unlike what we know. And it got me thinking, like, if magic is inherently, I guess, like, contrary to religion or contrary to society as we know it, like, what does it look like when this act of rebellion succeeds? Or does magic obfuscate itself? If we succeed in, like, changing the world, does that mean there's actually no more need for that kind of magic, or new magic rises up to fill its
Interesting.
place?
It reminds me, because you mentioned anarchy. One of the few sensible books about politics I've ever read is Zenarchy by Carrie Thornley, who is one of the co-founders of the Discordian Society. And he defines Zen. Archy is social order. Zen is meditation. Zenarchy is the social order that arises from meditation. As a doctrine, it holds that universal enlightenment is the prerequisite for the abolition of the state. Or, that failing, when we're all enlightened, nobody's going to give a damn if there's still a state. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, what would anarchy look like? That's an interesting question. And there are anarchists. The early anarchists wrote more about that. This idea of slow change. Anarchism is not, we're just going to tear everything down and burn it and destroy and have no social structure. Anarchy is a social structure without the state. And guys like Kropotkin and Bakunin and Proton, they're talking about a slow evolution to this, based often on like anarcho-syndicalism, small industrial groups that would be run democratically that would eliminate the need for the state, the group that has the monopoly on force, sort of thing. So
I think Starwood is both a good magical model and maybe also like an anarchic model.
I think it is definitely a step in that direction. I mean, we do have a structure here, but it is much more of it's a hell of a lot less hierarchical than, I don't think we need to get rid of hierarchy all at once, but we certainly need to flatten it very quickly,
Starwood does benefit from the temporary part, though.
Yes,
too.
yeah.
I mean, if
Yeah.
we were here for a month, things would be operating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'd have to run
Yeah,
things really differently.
yeah, and so Wisteria has to operate in the world as a corporation, and Ace. I'm not sure what their business
That's right.
structure is. And
We're literally
everything.
not separate from the state.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, but yes, if we choose to act as if, and that is actually part of Carrie Thornley's idea in Zenarchy. You start with subjective liberation.
Okay.
You decide. I did not get this directly from him, but my copy of Zenarchy is signed and has a drawing of a tiger on a little cartoon tiger, and it has, Thornley wrote in it, "Kill the Buddha, smash the state," which is an absolutely fascinating statement, because there's this famous saying in Zen, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Now, the guy who said this after the Buddha had been dead for 1,000 years. So he doesn't mean like go and find Prince Siddhartha and stab him in the heart. He meant if you meet the Buddha on the road, what you have been is a mental construction, because the Buddha is not around anymore. So if you want to be free of this mental construction that's going to restrict you, because even the Buddha, having the idea of the Buddha as a mental construction, is going to restrict you ultimately, you have to kill the Buddha. Same way, if you want to be free of the state is a mental construction. The law, I must obey the law. Why? Yeah, I mean, I must do what that guy with the gun says, okay, or he's going to shoot me. That's objective reality. But following the law is a social mental construction. And so, if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. If you meet the state on the road, in your own mind, smash it. Boom, the state is already abolished. How will you preserve your freedom now?
You could also say that a person who knows of their own magic and is confident in it, if all people were like that, the state would be harmless.
Yes. The person that Crowley's true will. If we all knew our own true will, then yeah, the state. Well, the people working for the state would know their true will. They wouldn't be fucking with us. They would be. They'd have better things to do.
A couple things to set up right around.
Yeah.
there.
I think we'll get out of here
Just
and
as long as
yeah. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Tom.
Thanks
Appreciate it.
everybody for coming out.
Thank you very much.